So I thought this morning I was going to talk a little bit about coping with kids' meltdowns because I know, first of all, it's the day after Halloween. That is often a problem. But this is just something that's come up. A lot of people have asked in comments and when they enter the group, those questions that I ask on the forum about how to deal with tantrums and meltdowns and things like that. So I'm going to offer a few tips. First of all, I do want to say that, no parents are perfect, and I don't do this perfectly all the time. Coping with meltdowns is a tricky parenting issue. So just give yourself some, leeway and patience in dealing with your kids' meltdowns because it is hard, especially when they're young and they don't have a lot of emotional control. So if your kids are melting down, especially if they're, under 5 or 6, it's common and it happens. And our goal is really to try to teach them how to deal with emotions more effectively. So over time, and this takes years, over time, they can learn how to cope with those big emotions and hopefully not melt down quite so easily. So I'm going to offer 4 tips that I have found helpful, and these kind of, I think, form the basis of what we would call positive parenting, which is just focusing on more of a teaching approach to parenting, where you're teaching this, the root word of the form discipline really comes from the word of teaching. So when we talk about discipline in regards to positive parenting, it's not so much about punishing. It's about discipline in the form of teaching and teaching them skills that they can build on throughout, their early years to help deal with emotions better. And so I think if we keep that in mind, that it's not really about punishing our kids, it's about discipline and teaching and help skill building, really scaffolding their skills so that they have those social emotional skills that will help them throughout life. And so these are just 4 ideas that have helped me, and most of them are based on research. Okay, so tip number 1, your kid is melting down. One of the first ideas that helps is distinguishing between punishing emotions and disciplining behavior. And so I think the first step would be don't punish emotions. And so if your kid is melting down, especially if they're young, very young, usually they're not doing it because they're trying to push your buttons or, anything like that. The emotions overwhelm them and they don't have the skills to deal with them. And so if you try not to punish, the crying or the outburst itself, we're trying to put boundaries on behavior, not so much emotions. And so if you can validate those feelings in some way, now this is sometimes hard, but it comes from the idea of trying to be empathetic towards whatever your kid is going through. So, if they're upset because you have to leave the park or, try to validate that experience. Like, I know you're upset that we have to leave the park. I know that makes you sad. And so some sort of validation that what they're feeling is a real feeling, that it's not just, and sometimes we feel like it may be ridiculous. They're throwing a fit because you have to leave the park. But in their mind, it's upsetting them and it is a real emotion for them. And so trying to validate emotions. Okay, so that's the first one. Number 2 is try to label the feelings that they're having, label their emotions, and that gives them the language to understand what they're experiencing. So whatever feeling they're experiencing, sadness, anger, frustration. And so you can just explain like, oh, I know this makes you feel angry. I understand that you feel sad about this. Try to empathize and give them the words, because it sounds kind of silly. It may sound trite to us. But kids don't always really understand, even little kids especially, what the emotions are, and so helping them, give them the language for sadness, frustration, anger, fear, whatever that you think it is that they're feeling, because over time that will give them the language that they can use when they're feeling that feeling. And so then they will be able to express, I'm feeling really sad about this. Instead of just having an outburst, they'll be able to explain what their feeling is. And so and there's some research behind this, and I can post the article that I wrote about this, but kids who have the language for emotions over time will learn to self-regulate better. And so, because they have those words to use to say that they're sad, to say that they're frustrated, instead of just, blowing up and having a meltdown. So that is really helpful to label the feeling. And that also builds a point of connection between you and the child. And so that is a crucial point of this, is that the reason that sometimes things like timeout doesn't work is because you're kind of breaking the connection with your child instead of trying to build it back together to help them get, because you kind of have to be the self-regulator for them, help them with emotion regulation because they don't have the skill. So if you help them understand the language for emotion and you're talking to them instead of just saying like, go to your room, and that kind of breaks that connection, then you're building that connection, which will help them calm down. And so if you can use the words for the emotions and then just talk to them about it, that is building that connection back between the two of you, and that will help them calm down usually. And point number 3, and this is something I've just recently in the past few years really come to understand better, is try to understand the meaning behind the behavior. This is not always clear, but one big piece of positive parenting is looking at behavior as a form of communication. Most behavior is expressing some sort of underlying need or a skill that needs working on with your child. So, if your child is melting down and you're looking, and kind of in the back of your mind, you're thinking about what else has gone on today. Are they hungry? Are they tired? Did they have a rough day at school? Did something else happen that is expressing itself in this form of behavior? Then that is sometimes helpful. And it helps you come from a place of empathy, because if you know, like, this behavior is really coming from a place of them being overtired or coming from the fact that they haven't eaten in 4 hours, then you're able to kind of look at it in a new light and kind of not get so upset, because you're saying, okay, well, this kid's just overtired. So let's just, go home and try to regroup and reconnect. And then you can approach it from a more empathetic perspective, I think. And sometimes understanding what the meaning of the behavior is sometimes hard. But just trying to keep in mind, is there something else going on here? And a lot of times it's just, this kid is young and doesn't have the skills to self-regulate. And so that's kind of the overarching idea, I think. But sometimes it's something more specific. If they're going through a hard time, if they had a rough day at school, hunger, fatigue, all the common, triggers that can cause meltdowns. Okay, and then number 4 is getting back to the more disciplinary part of it. And so, in the first piece I talked about, we want to set boundaries on behavior, not on emotions. And so that comes back to this place, is where you set a boundary. If there was some sort of behavior that you didn't like, or that they broke a rule, then after they're a little bit calmer, usually is the best time to do it. Then come back to that disciplinary piece and talk about, whatever they did. Hitting is not okay. It's okay to be sad and be frustrated, but we don't hit. And then you can offer suggestions about how you could they could do something different in the future. Okay, when you're upset, what are some things we can do instead of hitting? We can take deep breaths. We can, if you feel like you need to hit something, hit a pillow or something else, try to come up with some strategies that they can handle that situation differently in the future. And a lot of them come back to these kind of social emotional coping strategies. Breathing strategies help a lot. Finding another redirection for that energy that they're feeling, that big emotion. And so those, and I can get into more of those in another video, but redirecting the behavior into something more positive and giving them some tools so that in the future, when they feel that emotion of anger or sadness or frustration, that they don't act out in some way that is dangerous or, inappropriate, but that they have the skill to calm themselves down the next time, or, in the future. This takes years to develop, but so they have skills to cope with those big emotions. And that's really the key point here, is discipline is more about teaching than punishing. And so whatever your strategies are that help you calm down, you can share those with your kids. And there's lots of other strategies that are, appropriate for kids, so that they are learning throughout the years that it's not just about kind of stuffing down emotions, so we can feel our emotions, but we have to have boundaries on how we behave, and that we can't hit or throw or things like that kids sometimes do. So just to recap, number one is validate the feeling. If you can, it's helpful to help them understand that you empathize with what they're feeling. Number two, label the feelings. Give them the language to discuss their emotions so that they pick up on that as years go by. Three is consider the meaning of the behavior, if there's something underlying that might be causing them to have the meltdown. And then four, the discipline part of it, or the boundary, where you set a boundary on, what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior in that situation. And that's where it comes back to the teaching part. So hope you find that helpful. And if you're watching this later, if you have questions, feel free to comment, and I will check back in the group and see if anyone has questions that I can address. So have a good day, and I'll see you guys probably next week.